So being the last panel is always difficult, so thanks for sticking around. Actually, Steffi, I'm not senior editor, I'm only technology editor, so... Okay, cool. So the motto of this conference is optimism and courage, and I promise you this is going to be the most pessimistic panel you've heard today, because outside of tech, the world is, as you say in your book, in danger, at risk. We have trade wars, we have China flexing its muscles, we have Ukraine, we have crazy people running big countries, we have Brexit, and so on and so forth. So in your book you argue the world has never been a more dangerous place since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that's saying something. So how dangerous is the world? Do we have to get ready for war?
I don't think we have to worry too much. Well, you never know, but I don't think we need to worry too much about the war between the great powers. So I'm not really worried about, intentions to conduct nuclear war. But what I am really worried about is that the world, and I really insist on that, the world is really extremely dangerous, a dangerous situation at the moment because of the total loss and lack of mutual trust. Remember, some of you may not have been alive then in the midst of the Cold War in the 1970s and 80s, when we had, this huge ideological dispute between communism and capitalism, the West and the Soviet Union. Even then, we had multiple negotiating fora that were practically meeting every day. I was personally, as a young diplomat, involved in that. We knew the guys on the other side. We were talking about reductions of nuclear weapons, about conventional arms, tanks, etc., numbers of soldiers in Europe. None of that is happening at the moment.
So what is happening?
Worse, Ludwig, even those arms control arrangements that have been created during the Cold War and after are now apparently beginning to fall apart. So this is why I think this is a really dangerous place at the moment.
So what has happened? Why don't you know, or why don't diplomats no longer know who they should talk to or know themselves for years? What has happened? What's kind of the structural reasons for this liberal world order, which kind of has guaranteed peace, at least in our parts of the world, for decades, is falling apart?
Well, I think we live at a moment in time which, historians in 20 or 30 years will be able to identify better than we can do that today as a period of dramatic and dramatically rapid change in almost everything. Change, of course, in relations of power. I give you guys one example. In 1990, the gross national product of the Soviet Union, of Russia, that didn't even exist then, was twice that of China. The GDP of Russia today is exactly 1/10 of that of China. That is what's going on. And for us here in Europe, if you think that we're unaffected by this, we're not unaffected by it. Europe, in terms of share of GDP, and Europe, in terms of population, global population, will be reduced over the next couple of decades to approximately 5%. 5%. So this is one of the reasons why I happen to believe that our British friends are really making a mistake. If they were part of 5%, they would at least have a minimum opportunity to be listened to. If they abandon even the 5% and try to raise their voice on their own, God help them in that future brave new world. Second point, technology. We used to believe that the nation state, and in law school, I went to law school, you're being taught that the nation state maintains and defends the monopoly on using force. Only the nation state, can buy a tank and start shooting, not you as an individual. Now, this monopoly of power of force has been almost totally undermined by modern technological developments. As we all know, but we're not really thinking about the consequences. If you are a smart hacker, or if you are a smart hacker for working for a terrorist group or for some other group that pursues, some acceptable or unacceptable objective, these groups can today inflict damage in dimensions which used to be, until quite recently, totally and absolutely the reserve of the nation state. So what does this mean? It means that the nation state, continues to claim we are strong. We aren't anymore. Others are strong. Non-state actors, think of the Islamic State. We claim it's now gone, but other groups of this nature will show up in other places and will challenge the world as we knew it. So not only are relative power relationships changing dramatically, but non-state actors are taking over in a way. And that's what helps to create the chaos and the unpredictability and the volatility that's almost unprecedented.
Can I be a little bit contrary and question that? Don't we see right now the fact that technology is actually empowering nation states, at least certain types of nation states, authoritarian ones, that kind of the weakening of nation states is happening in democracies, misinformation, fake news, all that kind of democracy or the democratic rules falling apart. But if you look at China, AI, big data, all that, I see that more as a kind of a strengthening factor for at least in the case of China.
I think, Ludwig, you're absolutely right, but I'm not sure the jury has decided who is going to be empowered more, the authoritarian nation state or the individual. I mean, the individual used to be subject to being told, what's going on. And the individual had very limited opportunities to be listened to. That's also a disruption of tremendous global proportions, that today every little farmer somewhere in the Congo can, if he has an internet connection and a smartphone, he can tweet. He can participate in a global conversation. Unprecedented communication opportunities. And I don't think that events such as the yellow vests in France in recent weeks would have been possible as non-organized as this movement used to appear. There was no leader who gave a speech. There were no leaflets handed out. It was all done via modern communication. So you're right. There is an element of unhappy, as far as I'm concerned, empowerment for the nation state, who finds it easier than in the past with modern technology to supervise, to repress, to control. But on the other hand, we have an enormous a blow-up of opportunities for the individual or for groups to express their views in good or in not so good ways.
And how should the nation state react? I mean, regulate, kind of impose some semblance of control back onto the system, or is that too late?
Well, look, we used to say, everybody is equal. Well, nation states are not equal. There are some that are powerful. China is growing more powerful, I guess, every year. The United States will continue to be by far the most significant military power, probably for decades to come. It's relatively easy to predict. But there are others, like us, for example, here in Western Europe, the member states of the European Union. We are all, in global terms, small states. In fact, let me quote a very famous person from the generation of the founders of the European Union, Paul-Henri Spaak. He was a Belgian foreign minister, one of the founding personalities of the EU. And Paul-Henri Spaak, I quote from memory, he said, in the European Union, there are only two categories of countries: small countries and countries that have not yet fully understood that they are small. That is also a hint, if I may, to the situation in London.
It's not that small, Britain. I've lived there. But do you suggest that kind of the world could be saved by Europe? I mean, is Europe strong enough, a united Europe, to kind of pick up the pieces and put together Humpty Dumpty back again?
You know, I am a totally committed pro-European person. And I wish I could say, yes, we are strong, we are united, and we'll make it. We'll make it happen. Unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. I happen to be an optimist. I think Europe is not only not falling apart, I find it extremely regrettable that when I listen to my friends in America, they seem to look only at the Brexit phenomenon, and they seem to conclude from looking at the Brexit phenomenon that this is just one sign of a European Union imploding or exploding, which I think is totally wrong. The population throughout the European Union finds the need for an effective European Union, for integration, for the principal integration, more important, more acceptable, more necessary than ever. So actually, we are moving in the right direction. The problem is our rules and regulations, our constitution, if you will, our treaties, are not yet creating the framework that would turn the European Union in a globally credible and strong and united actor that speaks with one voice. We fall apart on almost every issue. It's almost a miracle for me to see that over the last 4 years we have not yet fallen apart. I hope we will not fall apart on the question of should we or should we not have sanctions against Russia. Interestingly enough, on that issue, all 28 member states stayed together, but that's almost an exception. So I think that the next step for the European Union, if we mean what we say, namely that we want to take our destiny more into our own hands, as Chancellor Merkel has repeatedly said, we can't rely anymore on others taking care of all of our issues and problems. Well, what we need to do is introduce into the European Union decision-making formalities the principle of majority decision-making. Without that, you will always have, on almost every single question, you will always have among 28, or maybe in the future 27 countries, you will always have somebody who will say, oh no, I have a domestic issue with that, I have to say no. And you will have no decision. And the EU will not be seen as a credible actor speaking with one voice.
But this, the reason why Europe doesn't have this strategic autonomy yet, I mean, one reason is certainly Germany. I mean, what does Germany have to do? How does Germany have to change? What can Germany do to make that, so Europe can make that next step?
Well, quite frankly, I think that it is very important. It would be great if this current or the next German government found it possible to raise its hand in Brussels and to say, we table formally, officially, a proposal to introduce majority voting. Now, if you are a realist, you will know that not everybody will applaud this. There will be many who will say never. Some will say certainly not now. So it will be a difficult process. But what I believe is that if Germany said, we want to introduce majority voting, and we would accept majority votes even if they run against our own, interest, that would, with one stroke of the pen, so to speak, eliminate these suspicions which have grown over the last decade that Germany is throwing its power around. First on austerity, on financial issues, more recently on other issues like, some of our neighbors are getting the impression, for example, on energy, on Nord Stream, Germans are simply pursuing their own national interests, don't listen to Poles, Ukrainians, etc., etc. So I think we have reason to be mindful of the need to demonstrate that we stick to the idea which Thomas Mann expressed in the early 50s when he said, what we need to develop is not a German Europe, but a more European Germany. That's the idea.
On a, let's say, higher level, global level, I mean, there's this, for lack of a better word, meme of that the great power competition is back. I mean, do you agree? And how long do you think that's going to last? How bad is that going to be? I mean, are China and the US destined for war in that sense?
Well, first of all, let me say that I find it extremely regrettable that this seems to be the new motto. Competition, rivalry between great powers. Well, good luck if this is not going to lead to yet another series of conflicts and wars. I mean, hopefully not great power wars. We used to think until quite recently, didn't we, that there were sufficiently numerous huge challenges that should actually unite great powers and small powers alike, like climate change, like terrorism, like continuing to foster growth in the non yet fully developed world, where enormous progress has been made, yes, especially in China and in India, but there are many other places, think of Africa, where there is not enough growth yet. So the idea of great power competition is, as far as I'm concerned, actually an expression of almost complete irresponsibility in terms of taking care of planetary needs. But it's happening. Let's be realists again. It's happening, and your question is, what can we do? Not a lot. All we can do, we as Europeans or as Germans, all we can do is remind our Russian, Chinese, American friends and interlocutors that what the world needs, and I think what the Chinese citizen and voter and the Russian voter will want to hear from their leaders in the next 10 or 15 or 20 years is, why didn't you do more to make us wealthy and healthy and happy? Because this great power competition is not going to lead to greater wealth for everybody. Maybe it will lead to greater wealth for some and less wealth for others, and that will only enhance the tension. So I think this is yet another reason why the title of my book, Welt in Gefahr, is not... I was criticized when I published it. Some people said, das klingt reißerisch. This sounds too... what's the English translation for that?
Too extreme.
Too extreme. You're overdoing it. Well, no, I don't think I'm overdoing it at all. I think this is a pretty accurate description of where we're, of the direction in which we're heading if this idea of great power competition takes hold. And it is now the official doctrine, of course, of the Trump administration. In the strategic documents of the Trump administration, the adversarial relationship with China and Russia takes number one in the list of priorities.
So if kind of the great power competition seems to become is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is a tech conference. What would you say? What does that mean for the tech industry? Are we really moving, as some say, for the world where you have kind of two separate technospheres, kind of one Chinese one and one American one? Is that kind of how you think about the future of the tech industry?
Well, I hope not. I would hope that the world of the next couple of decades would be a world where Chinese companies can compete, on hopefully on a more or less level playing field with European companies, with American companies, and push each other forward. And there will be significant ups and downs for everybody. But if we divide the world as we used to divide it, by the use of armies, if we divide the world into 2 or 3 different spheres of technological dominance, excluding other parts, which is one of the reasons I feel very, very unhappy, and I just have a very bad feeling when I listen to these discussions about, the Chinese company, Huawei, excluding them from competition. Well, my sense is if we start excluding one company from our, competitive field, we shouldn't be too surprised if the other side is going to start excluding some of our companies from their competitive bidding, etc. And that's taking us in the exact wrong direction.
But I mean, 5G will be a very important infrastructure, if not kind of the most critical infrastructure there will be. So shouldn't one be rather careful who we let build that infrastructure? I mean, China, as it is, kind of Huawei is a quasi-state-run company, even though it's private. But if Peking or Beijing says, we want you to tap into the German industrial network or whatever, they probably will do that. So shouldn't we be very careful in who we let into that?
Absolutely. And I confess, Ludwig, I don't have, the patent response. All I'm saying is, as we understand that this is, as you describe it, a real problem, let's try to make sure that it's not going, this idea, of making sure that countries or intelligence apparatuses of other countries cannot, through commercial companies, exploit positions without us knowing about it, etc., etc. Let's make sure that this idea is not going to be misused, because it could easily. It's like protectionism. You try to protect your iron, your steel industry, and of course the other side will start protecting their steel industry. So let's make sure that we're not creating a situation that would I think would have terrible results. But I admit, I don't know what the best technological and political solution to this problem is. I'm very worried that we might take wrong decisions on this.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ischinger. You leave me a little bit more optimistic than I was before.
Let's be optimistic. There are huge issues. They can be addressed, but we need to be together, at least we in the European Union. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.